NTV Wild Talk in partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Service and Wildlife Direct.
Hello and welcome to NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Now last week you met 4 incredible women who have dedicated their lives to studying elephants. Well, today you're about to meet one woman who has spent 55 years of her life studying and researching chimpanzees. Yes, those precious cousins of ours. That woman is Dr. Jane Goodall. She is also a conservationist and a UN messenger for peace. Here's a little bit more about her. Born in 1934, 82-year-old Jane Goodall is best known around the world for her expertise on chimpanzees. As a primatologist, Goodall spent years of her life studying social and family interactions of wild chimpanzees in Gombe National Park, Tanzania. Much of what we know about chimps today is thanks to Goodall's research, and the chimps we have in Kenya at the Sweetwaters Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Olpejeta is partly thanks to the Jane Goodall Institute. It rescued the abused and troubled chimps from war-torn Burundi in 1993 and settled them in Kenya with the Olpejeta Conservancy and the Kenya Wildlife Service. Wild chimpanzees are critically endangered, with just 150,000 to 300,000 left in the world. Goodall's trip to Kenya included a visit to see some of her old friends and new at the sanctuary. Well, joining me now is Dr. Jane Goodall. Thank you so much for being with us on NTV Wild Talk. It is both a pleasure and a privilege to meet you. Dr. Goodall, you have spent 55 years of your life studying chimpanzees. You have written numerous books, you've written numerous films as well, and you have won several awards for your work to do with chimpanzees. But let's start from the very beginning. How did it all begin?
Began when I was a very little girl growing up in England, and I loved animals from the start. People say, how did you come to love animals? I was born that way. And I had a very supportive mother. So when she found I'd taken a whole lot of worms to bed with me, she didn't get mad. She just said they need to go outside or they'll die. And when I vanished for over 4 hours and even the police had been called, it was when we'd gone for a holiday onto a farm, a proper farm, a farm where animals roam around, you know, not one of these terrible factory farms. And as we lived in London, for me, a little girl loving animals, it was really, really exciting. And I was given the job of helping to collect the hens' eggs. So, yes, I collected them from the little nest boxes, but, you know, there's the egg. Where is the hole big enough for the egg to come out? I was asking everybody, and they didn't tell me, so I decided to find out for myself. And that meant waiting. And I waited and waited and waited, which was fine, I saw it. But the family didn't know where I was.
Wow, so that was no doubt a big worry. But from hens and eggs and worms, how did you get to chimpanzees?
You know, in those days there was no TV, so I learned from books. And when I was 10, I found a little book which I could just afford. We had very little money, and it was called Tarzan of the Apes. It was a second-hand book, and I fell in love with Tarzan. And what did he do? He married the wrong Jane. Anyway, that's when my dream began. I will grow up, I will go to Africa, I will live with animals, I will write books about them. I didn't want to be a scientist, just a naturalist. And everybody laughed at me. Well, he won't do that. You know, you don't have any money, Africa's far away. World War II was raging. And I was a girl, and girls didn't have those opportunities. But where everybody else laughed, Mum said, if you really want this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of opportunity and never give up. And that's a message that I take to young people all around the world living in disadvantaged situations and so forth. I've had hundreds of letters saying, you've taught me that because you did it, I can do it too.
Wow.
So anyway, leaving school, no money for university, got a job in London as a secretary, got a letter from a school friend who'd moved to Kenya with her parents, saved up money by working in a hotel as a waitress, which paid a little bit more than the job I had in London, and I was living at home, and finally got enough money for my return fare, and by boat in those days. Came out here to Kenya, heard about the late Dr. Louis Leakey, Richard's father.
Yes.
Went to see him at the Natural History Museum and came away with a job. I didn't go to ask for one. And anyway, he took me to Olduvai, which in those days all the animals were there. Wow. You know, and out on the plains I met a lion one evening, and it followed, well, a long way. And I think it was that evening around the campfire that Louis said, I've been looking for somebody for years to go and study chimpanzees in what was then Tanganyika.
Which is Tanzania now.
Would I do it? Well, yes.
And how old were you at that time?
At that time I was 23, nearly 24, and it wasn't until I was 26 that he got the money and the permission for me to start this study, because, you know, there I was, hadn't been to college, young untrained girl, straight from England.
In Africa.
Here in Africa, studying chimps, dangerous possibly in a forest, and nobody knew anything about them in the wild. So anyway, I went back and learned everything I could until he got the money.
Tell us now more about your experience in what was Tanganyika at the time with the chimpanzees. When you first came across them, what did you think? What were your first reactions towards them?
Well, more significant was their reaction towards me. They'd never seen a white ape before, and they took one look and ran away.
Really?
This was a nightmare. So day after day, week after week, and I was thinking, you know, we only had money for 6 months at the beginning, and you know, if I failed, I would have let Louis Leakey down, who staked so much on this. Anyway, fortunately, it was after about 4.5 months when I was getting more and more desperate. And one day I saw a chimp crouched over a termite mound, and I saw a black hand reach out and break off stems of grass and push them down into the mound and eat off the termites that were gripping on. And then I saw him pick a leafy twig and strip the leaves. So he was making a tool, which today wouldn't seem very exciting, but back then it was thought that humans and only humans used and made tools. We were man the tool user. Right. So that Leakey sent me a telegram back saying, well, now we shall have to redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as humans. Wow.
Gosh.
And that's what brought in the National Geographic Society. And not only did they say, well, we'll continue supporting her when the money runs out, but they sent a wildlife photographer and cameraman, and that was Hugo van Lauwijk, who became my first husband. Oh, right. And so, you know, it was those early pictures, because by this time the chimps had got used to me, and I knew them by name and had named them in our community. And so the pictures he managed to get went out into the hearts and minds of first America and then the world.
And how did this interaction with the chimpanzees and this research, learning so much more about them, because the information was fascinating, how did it make you feel? What did it do for you?
Well, I don't know that it did anything for me except to, you know, ensure that I would be able to continue. It was just so fascinating. And the chimpanzees, you know, they each have their own individual personality. They have emotions like we do: happiness, sadness, fear, despair. They're very bright, very smart, and the more we've learned about them, the more we realize how like us they are in so many ways. We didn't know back then that we share 98.6% of DNA with them. We didn't know exactly the similarities in the structure of brain, blood, immune system, and so on. But the behavior that I was seeing, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another on the back, using different objects for different purposes as tools, the close bonds between mothers and their offspring, bonds that can last throughout a life of up to 60 years. And, you know, the fact there's good mothers and bad mothers in chimp society, and the offspring of the good mothers who are affectionate protective and above all supportive, just like my mother.
Yes.
Their offspring do better. The males get a higher rank, the females are themselves better mothers. And you know, the difference of the males as they compete for the top rank, some use their brains, some use their brawn. The ones who get there with their brains last much longer.
Right. We saw some of that action actually when we were out in Olpejeta, the alpha male, yes. So how did you spend your days when you were out in Tanganyika, which is Tanzania at the time? What were you looking out for and what were you doing? How many hours in the day were you with these chimpanzees?
Well, I was with them as many hours as I could. I couldn't always find them. Although as I got to know them better, often they make nests in the trees at night. And if you know where they're sleeping, you can get there at dawn. But every single day I was up in the mountains before sunrise, climbing just as the first light of day. And I stayed out until it was nearly dark, every day. People say, what about weekends? Well, chimps don't have weekends.
Right.
You know, they're about the business of finding food and marking out their, well, patrolling their territory.
And what was perhaps the most exciting or fascinating moment for you? I'm sure there were so many, but what perhaps struck you the most?
Well, one was the first time that I went up to a group and I got too close by mistake. It was very thick, and I was waiting for them to run away, and they just looked at me and went on grooming each other, and that was like, yes, I've made it.
Right.
You know? And I think the first time, the very famous old female Flo, she already had 3 offspring, and they're about 5 years apart. And she just had a new baby, and he was about just able to totter when he was about 4 months old. And he starts approaching me, because by this time they were coming to my camp, and we gave them bananas. We don't do that anymore, but we did then. And so he's looking up at me with, you saw these big, or maybe you didn't see an infant, but they're so adorable, and they got these big eyes, and he's looking up at me. And his mother, she's got this slight worried expression, pursed lips, and she's got her hand around him, and she lets him come. And he reaches out and touches my nose, and I'll never forget that.
Oh wow, what a special moment indeed. And how did it feel when you had this sort of a connection with the chimpanzees? How did it make you feel when you were seeing them every single day?
Well, most days, yes. Well, it just, I wasn't really thinking about it. I was just so desperate to learn more and more and more, you know, so that every day, what can I see, writing it down. And so I wrote down everything. When I got to Cambridge, because Louis Leakey told me I had to get a degree, and it had to be a PhD. There was no time for a BA, he said. So I was feeling very nervous when I got there. I'd been about over 1.5 years in the field. And of course now I know how little I knew, but I knew a lot more than anybody else.
Yeah.
Imagine how I felt when I got to Cambridge, nervous of these professors, you know, because they were all scientists, and I was told I'd done everything wrong. I shouldn't have given the chimps names, they should have had numbers. That was scientific. I couldn't talk about them having personalities, minds capable of thinking, and certainly not emotions, because those were unique to us. And back then in 1961, it was actually believed by science that there was a line dividing us from the rest of the animal kingdom. There was a difference in kind. And, you know, so when the professors told me that we were different, we were totally unique, I luckily had a great teacher when I was a child. And that teacher taught me the professors, for all their erudite knowledge, are wrong. And that teacher, that was my dog.
Really?
Rusty. You cannot share your life in a meaningful way with a dog, a cat, a parrot, I don't care what it is, a cow, a donkey, and not know that of course animals have personalities, minds, and feelings. It's taken a long time for science to get out of the box it was in. So today, you can, if you're a student, you can study animal mind, you can study emotion, you can study personality. I couldn't have, because they didn't exist.
Goodness me. So how did you then deal with what the professors were telling you at Cambridge after all that hard work that you put in Tanganyika?
Because I'm very stubborn and because I knew they were wrong. And fortunately, my supervisor, Professor Robert Hind, he'd been my sternest critic, but he came to Gombe. And he said in 2 weeks he learnt more about animal behavior in all his previous life. So then he helped me and helped me find ways of putting down what I knew without totally upsetting all the science.
And aside from that challenge when you were in Cambridge, when you were in Tanzania, what were some of the major challenges that you had to deal with at that time?
Well, money, getting funding always to carry on. Then I suppose there were always problems sometimes with the government, you know how it goes. There was one time when I was told I'd have to leave and that I'd had my time and thank you very much. And that was at a time when Tanzania was in a chaos and the mail didn't work very well. So having had a good cry sitting out on the beach in Dar es Salaam, which is where my second husband lived, but he was dead by then, so I was on my own. And I burned the letter and buried it in the sand and ignored it. And that was it. Nothing else happened.
Oh, wow.
And you see, had I gone to confront the head of TANAPA, I would have lost, of course. But he had other worries on his mind.
And he moved on, and so did you.
Well, so anyway, he did send somebody who was supposed to direct the research, a very nice young man. He said, well, it's a bit confusing. So he said, I think I'm director of the national parks and you're director of the chimpanzee research. So we just got on fine.
All right, well, you know, that was just the beginning, and since then there's been so much more, which we'll find out in just a moment. Now though, it's time for our wild guess question. What are the 3 points of advice that Jane Goodall's mother gave her, which she uses to inspire young people today? What are the 3 points of advice that Jane Goodall's mother gave her, which she uses to inspire young people today? Use the hashtag NTVWild on Twitter or like our NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer on the timeline. Answers sent in via Facebook Messenger will not be considered. The first person to answer correctly wins 2 nights for 2 at the incredible Fairmont Mount Kenya Safari Club on a full board basis in a deluxe room plus 1 game drive for 2 adults. The winner also gets a bottle of wine courtesy of Wines of the World and a gift hamper courtesy of Wildlife Direct. Terms and conditions apply. Last week's lucky winner was Rosemary Mutunke. Welcome back to NTV Wild Talk. Here is a reminder of our wild guess question. What are the 3 points of advice that Jane Goodall's mother gave her, which she uses to inspire young people today? What are the 3 points of advice that Jane Goodall's mother gave her, which she uses to inspire young people today? Use the hashtag NTVWild on Twitter or like our NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer on the timeline. Answers sent in via Facebook Messenger will not be considered. The first person to answer correctly wins 2 nights for 2 at the incredible Fairmont Mount Kenya Safari Club on a full board basis in a deluxe room plus 1 game drive for 2 adults. The winner also gets a bottle of wine courtesy of Wines of the World and a gift hamper courtesy of Wildlife Direct. Terms and conditions apply. Last week's lucky winner was Rosemary Mutunke. And now my conversation with Dr. Jane Goodall continues. Dr. Goodall, you spent plenty of time in Africa. You went back to the United Kingdom to study, but then later on you did start the Jane Goodall Institute. What is that all about?
Okay, well, it was in 1986. By that time I'd built up a research station. I was spending almost all my time in Tanzania, in Gombe actually. And 4 of my students were kidnapped. And we got them all back, had to pay ransom, but got them back. They went over the Lake Tanganyika to what's now DRC. And so the funding dried up. I mean, you know, it was now an unsafe place, no students could come. And at that point, it was so near to ending the research, 1986. And so 1972. And fortunately, some friends of mine, because I was doing a little bit of teaching in America as well, and they said, well, we'll help you get the funding, we'll set up an NGO. And so they did, and it took a long time, but gradually we were able to, you know, get enough money to keep Gombe running, although it's still a problem. Still, you know, what am I doing now? I think the happiest days of my life were out there in the forest. Those early days, it was just me and the chimps. I mean, they can never come back, but they're in my heart. So, you know, why did I leave? It was because there was a big conference in Chicago, for the first time bringing together all the different people studying chimps in Africa, about 8 field studies by then.
Right.
And there was a session on conservation. It was a shock. Like right across Africa, chimp numbers dropping. They were being hunted for food, the beginning of the bushmeat trade, the commercial hunting of wild animals for food, caught in snares set for maybe pigs or antelopes. But whereas those used to be made of vines which the chimps could break, now they pull, and the wire noose gets tighter and they either die or lose a hand or foot. In some parts of Africa, West Africa, they're actually eaten as a delicacy. And of course the habitat destruction. We also had a session on some captive situations. I'll never forget secretly filmed video of our closest relatives in 5-foot by 5-foot cages in medical research labs, alone, nothing to do, this intensely social being kept by himself. His only interactions being white-coated people sticking needles in and things like that. I couldn't sleep. And so that's at that point, it was October 1986, and I knew I had to try and do something. We had the Institute by then. I went to that conference as a scientist, planning my wonderful life, bit of teaching, time for writing, papers and books, had a son there. And I left as an activist, and not conscious of making that decision. And since then, I haven't been more than 3 weeks any one place consecutively. So I'm now traveling on the road 300 days a year, all over the world. We have 32 Jane Goodall Institutes. There's one here in Kenya. Of course, there's one in Tanzania. A major fundraising JGI is the US. That's where most of the funding has come in from. And also developing a program for young people, because what's the point of killing yourself trying to conserve animals? And I know there's many people in Kenya doing just that. You mentioned 4 women who worked for elephants. Well, it's a waste of all our time if the next generation or the next generations aren't better stewards than we've been.
So when you visit all these various countries, what exactly do you do?
I generally go to a country for not more than 4 to 6 days. I give lectures, I do media, I go and talk to politicians, big businessmen, whatever the country arranges for me, which, you know, we sort of approve it, say you mustn't kill Jane. I know you've only got her for a short time, but, you know, she does need pausing in between things.
Of course.
And, but it's jolly hard work.
Do you have these conversations in relevant countries where there are key issues, for example in West Africa where the bushmeat trade exists, where chimpanzees are delicacies, or in the Arab Emirates where there are known pet keepers, chimpanzee keepers, or in, say, Asia where chimpanzees are used in entertainment?
Well, first of all, we have programs with institutes attached to them, JGIs, well, of course in Tanzania, then we have Uganda, we have DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a great hub for smuggling out chimps. In Congo, Brazzaville, a bushmeat country. In Senegal, actually, JGI Spain has a program there. We're working in Burundi with all its problems with fighting, and in all these countries it's very obvious you can't even try, you can't even think about saving chimpanzees, forests or anything else unless you work with the local people, and they're often living in extreme poverty. And you know, so we have a program which started in Tanzania, very holistic, improving people's lives in as many different ways as they ask for. We let them choose. We have started a Roots and Shoots program which is growing quite rapidly in Abu Dhabi, and we also have some programs in Dubai and I think Kuwait. And I go there twice a year. Okay. We have about 2,000 of our youth program in China, really? Which is of course the demand for ivory and rhino horn and so forth. So we tried to move in. I mean, JGI is specifically concentrating on chimps. Roots and Shoots, however, is the only program of its kind I know which is totally holistic. So every group of students who decide to join, they choose 3 projects. One to help people, one to help animals, and one to help the environment. And that includes domestic animals. We have members in kindergarten. Really? We have, yes, really. We have very strong in university. And everything in between, even some young adults out in the world, even staff of a major corporation, guinea fowl. They're going to interrupt us.
Yes, there are.
They're definitely going to.
There are just some guinea fowl in the background here.
So. Anyway, we're in nearly 100 countries with this program, and we have about 100,000 active groups, and they're changing the world. These guinea fowl. Could you shut up?
They are a noisy lot. We're trying to do an interview here.
Could you please be quiet? So, anyway, so because of the kind of school we're in, these are likely to become the leaders.
You just visited Olpejeta on this trip of yours. What did you go and do, and how did that trip make you feel, seeing those chimpanzees?
Well, we rescued them. JGI rescued them, and they actually all come from DRC. They were all smuggled into Burundi, and then we had to rescue them when the genocide started. I hadn't been to Sweetwaters, to Olpejeta for about, I don't know, 9 years or more, and I was shocked at how the chimps I knew so well had aged. I think I did a bit better than them.
Possibly,
but
yes.
Anyway, Urahara and Poco, those are the 2 I knew best, and they've both got this horrible eye condition which nobody can solve. They brought opticians from America. So anyway, I was really glad not only to see the chimps and see the lovely sanctuary, the lovely new enclosure, but also 5 of the keepers were there from the start. So I knew them in Burundi, well, from Burundi onwards.
You have been doing this kind of work for so many years now. What would you say, although there have no doubt been so many achievements, but overall, what do you think your biggest achievement for the chimpanzees in particular has been?
Well, I think really and truly it put chimpanzees on the map. But if you twist it around a bit, I truly believe the chimpanzees broke this impasse which set us aside as totally unique. And that led the way for understanding the capabilities, the amazing animal kingdom of which we are part. We're not separate, after all, we're part of this kingdom. The biggest difference, the explosive development of our intellect. So isn't it peculiar that the most intellectual species to ever walk the planet is destroying its only home?
And over the years, what perhaps have you not been able to achieve as well as you maybe hoped to during this time so far?
Well, for one, an endowment. You know, I'm 82, and however long we live, there's a set time, and wherever the end is, we get closer each year. So when you're 82, you're obviously closer than when you're 50. And so people say, well, aren't you going to slow down? I have to speed up because there's so much to do. And you know, if my traveling and lecturing stuff didn't make a difference, I'd stop tomorrow or today. This would be my last interview, but it does make a difference. And I was given certain gifts. I have to use them. A gift of communication, a strong constitution. You know, I mean, yeah, people listen.
And what are your concerns about the future when you look at the environment, when you look at our animals, and human-wildlife conflict as well? What are you worried about?
I'm worried like everybody who thinks about the future. And I know that many scientists will actually look you in the eye and say, you know, do your best, but it's too late. I've heard them, they've said it to me. And indeed it's depressing. But I choose to believe there's a window of time. Maybe it's wishful thinking, I don't think so. But I don't think it's a very big window of time, so we have to galvanize. I'm trying to get a critical mass of young people who understand, yes, we need money to live. It goes wrong when we live for money, unless it's money to make the world a better place. But, you know, my reasons for hope, first of all, is the youth. Because when they know the problems and we empower them to take action, it's amazing what they're doing. It's amazing some of the projects they tackle. Secondly, this brain, which we've used for bad purposes, but we are capable of doing technology and living individual lives that are better for the environment. Thirdly, the resilience of nature. There was a time around Gombe, little tiny Gombe National Park, where I did all the work, was part of a forest belt, and when I flew over it in '91, it was a little island of forest with totally bare hills. And that's when I realized, well, with people living in this dire situation, we can't even try and save the chimps. So that's when we began our Take Care Takari program. If you fly over now, there are no bare hills. There's trees everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And a corridor linking the isolated Gombe chimps to chimps in the south. And 2 new females came in last year. And, you know, animals on the brink of extinction have been given another chance. And then there were two more reasons: the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle the impossible and won't give up, and social media used right, you can suddenly reach out to a huge worldwide audience to get behind you on some kind of problem.
Most definitely. Is there still a lot to learn about chimpanzees?
We're learning new things all the time, not always nice things. They have a dark, violent side just like we do. Right. But they also have a gentle, loving and altruistic side. And I think, you know, most of what we have to learn is the different cultures in different chimp communities across Africa. We'll never know the whole span of cultural difference because so many communities have gone. But there's still something to learn all the time. And because each one is a different individual with his own different idiosyncrasies, we just, I mean, like if you're studying people, there's always something to learn. You're surprised. Why is that male killing infants suddenly? Is it because he fears competition from a young male? We don't know.
Do you have a favorite chimpanzee? You've met so many over the years, but do you have a favorite, someone that's really close to your heart?
The one I think of and still think of all the time was the first chimpanzee to lose his fear of me, the one who demonstrated tool using, the one who showed that chimpanzees occasionally hunt and eat meat, not just vegetarians as people thought. The one who basically introduced me to the other individuals, because when he was there they didn't run away because they saw how calm he was. That was David Greybeard. And there were some magical moments with David Greybeard.
And what happened to him?
Well, he died he died actually in an epidemic of some kind of respiratory disease.
When we look at the future, are you hopeful? You have talked about the work that the youth is doing, but when you look at the bigger picture, are you hopeful for our chimpanzees?
I know that we're going to lose more. I'm absolutely convinced that we will manage to save out there in the forest, that we will save some of them for future generations. We're working very hard on establishing corridors so that they can exchange genes, and yeah, some will live.
All right, Dr. Goodall, you're definitely not stopping anytime soon, are you?
No. Well, I don't know, my body may stop.
No. Well, at the rate you're going, I'm sure you will power on. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your story on NTV Wild Talk. You have done some incredible work, and we wish you all the best, because it is, of course, for a great reason, that is saving and learning more about our cousins. Thank you for your time. Joining me on NTV Wild Talk, the incredible Dr. Jane Goodall, who's been studying and researching chimpanzees for 55 years. And like I said, she is not stopping anytime soon. All right, after that, now we shift our focus and we turn our attention to our Wild Pick segment. This is where you send in a photograph to demonstrate that you love the environment and nature. Here are some of your photos. Sylvia Wanjiru was at the Ngong Hills on a hike with friends. She was there just for fun and because she loves nature. Sam Thuku was at the Amboseli National Park standing on Observation Hill, which gives a view of the park including the swamps and the elephants. He said he was on a road trip tour. And at the Hell's Gate National Park, this is Josfat Sawe. He was cycling for elephants, raising awareness on the need to conserve our elephants. He says he loves wildlife and conservation is in his heart. There's also Dan Kiptu, who sent in this photo taken at the Masai Mara Serengeti border. He was posing by the signboard and had gone on a school trip and says they all love nature. At the CCM Township Primary School in Meru County, this is Kaburu Munene. He was planting trees with children organised by the Kenya Forest Service. He was there to teach children the importance of adopting green school activities to ensure we bring up an environmentally conscious generation. And this photo is in honour of Ringo, the adorable southern white rhino calf who very sadly passed away on July 19th after an illness. Ringo had been rescued in October 2015 at the Olpejeta Conservancy after he was found abandoned. May Ringo rest in peace. If you want your photos showcased on our Wild Pick segment, just like our NTV Wild Facebook page and send a photo that shows you celebrating nature via private message. Include your full name, tell us where the photo was taken, what you were doing and why. You can also post your photo on Twitter using the hashtag NTVWild. So, as you heard from Dr. Jane Goodall, there is still so much more that needs to be done for our chimpanzees. She has spent her entire life studying and researching them, and she's not stopping anytime soon. But you can also get involved. All you need to do is get in touch with the Jane Goodall Institute right here in Kenya. To do that, just reach out to us on our NTV Wild Facebook page and we'll give you the relevant contacts. All right, well, that's it on NTV Wild Talk. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Smriti Vidyarthi. We'll see you again next Tuesday, 10 p.m.
Hello.
Hi, hello, Jane.
You're another Jane.
It's on silent.
Doug came and said, "Oh, your tent is ready," and I was a bit confused. Sorry.
But then I have to go to South Korea.
Oh, God. Here's some work. Oh, but I need to turn this off first.
NTV Wild Talk in partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Service and Wildlife Direct.